Hi there. It's been a little while since I did a video, and if you've seen any of my previous ones, you might note that this is not the same blue bin that I normally work with, and that's because this is a whole different system. These aren't my wild worms. This is just some of my red wigglers. So this system I started years ago, really, with worms from Uncle Jim's Worm Farm, and keeping them in a giant I don't know, it's like a 40-gallon tote or something like that. Anyway, all I did was pull one little container's worth of material with the worms in it out of that bin. As this is almost completely finished, I'll have to do some filtering on it, a little bit of a sift to get big chunks of unfinished material out when I'm done. But what I've been doing with this is getting the worms to move out of the material that is finished over here and into this area underneath this plastic bag. And there I set up the only new food that I've been adding to this, the only fresh stuff, the only good wet material that is going to drive them from working in here to working their way across and getting into here, so I can then scoop stuff out of here and start off a new worm bin out of it. At least that's a theory. I've seen other people do it. This is my first time trying that. In the past, I had only done the method of sorting them. You know, one of the ways to do it is to use light, is to take your worm castings and direct bright lights on them, and the worms hating that will work their way down, and then you can skim off the top level, and then they'll work their way down and you can skim off the top and keep doing that until you're left with just balls of worms. But I thought I'd give something different a little bit of a try here, and this way seems like it would be a lot less stressful on the worms, and it also gives more time for the baby worms to hatch out of cocoons in here, because there still are plenty of cocoons. So even after I've gotten the worms out of this system, this batch is going to be getting set aside to let all those cocoons hatch out and migrate those out of here as well. So I intend to actually have these systems going at several week intervals. So as this one goes into, as soon as I believe that all the worms are cleared out of the system, I will then set this one up as a hatchery, and then I will start another one of these from that same worm bin, and I will do the same process. So as worms are hatching out in this bin, worms will be starting to move across this one into the feeding area, and I'll just keep up a cycle of this. Meanwhile, the large bin has such a population that it's going to continue to reproduce. And I'm mainly going to use that as a system, I believe, as long as it works out with the timing, to continue to spawn new bins off of. Even bins that I can give to other people and get them started on their own vermicomposting. And I think it's something more people should do. I think it's a beautiful part of the ecosystem. I think it's such a great way to recycle our garbage, our stuff that would end up in landfills, and turn it into just pure gardening gold. This stuff is so rich, and it's so amazing, it's so good for plants, that if people are into gardening, why not get them into their own bin of this? Why not get them turning their stuff that they could otherwise be sending off to a landfill and turn it instead into stuff that will help their gardens thrive? That's what I am all about. I don't think you're going to necessarily change all of the world at once, but I think you can do things to help people change their own part of the world. Anyway, so I've got a new bin set up that these guys will be getting moved into. That's if they've really moved into this zone. I earlier was going through this material just to stir it up and help this material dry out more, because also if it's dry, the worms are going to want to evacuate it. So why the plastic's over here helps keep moisture in this area. So this dries out over in the finished part of the bin, and further encourages the worms to move into the finished end of the bin. That's the theory. But if there are a lot of worms in here, I'm going to be taking them, putting them in this bucket over here, and letting a little bit of light encourage them to go out, so I could clean out that zone a little bit, get a little bit more of that back into this feeding area, set this area back up to continue to get the worms to cross over into it. This is a several week sort of experiment. And then the worms that I put in this bucket will be starting off into their own new worm bin. And I'm pretty excited about that. It's always fun to launch off a new one and get it started. I've got a good number of these at this point. In fact, I name my bins just off of the phonetic military alphabet system. So Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, Delta, for instance, with each of those being a letter of the alphabet. And the new bin I'm starting today would be Kilo for K. So that tells you how many bins I've got currently. So it's going to be exciting to launch off a new one. And anyway, let's get into it and see what this area looks like over here. I have not looked down under here at all, so we're going to look at that together. All right. No real worms on the plastic bag, but I can see a few that have gotten their way inside the plastic bag. I don't know if the camera's picking that up, but inside there's a lot of moisture. So if I ever throw away that bag, I will definitely not neglect the little worms that are left in there. Anyway, I'm actually going to get a second bucket here. As I get scraps that don't have any worms in them, I'm going to be putting them in there. Because I want to try to get as many just plain old worms as I can into the worm bucket over here, so I can really just get an idea of how many I've got. Over the last couple weeks, as this bin has been sitting, I have been going through to stir up the contents so they can dry out better, and then tossing little chunks of material that's larger and would still provide a food source for the worms over here into this area. I don't want them to have much over here because I want to encourage them to leave those finished castings and come over to this nice new happening area here. This is where it's at. All right. Now I'm not going to pick every worm out of this. I do want to get the majority, but it would take quite some time to get every worm out. And then we'd end up with an hour-long video. Now, one thing, this system is getting some mites. Not real happy about that. It's covered in red mites right now. I've been looking at some solutions. Main worm channel that I watch on YouTube, AV, has been battling his own mites for some time, and he's been documenting that whole experience, and been really following that. And one thing he's currently trying is neem cake. It's made with neem seeds, which apparently really damage the life cycle of mites, but don't hurt worms at all. Worms enjoy eating it themselves, but it can help get rid of mites. And so I bought some of that, and I might be giving that a try, dusting a little bit of that over on this feeding area after I'm done sorting worms today. And so far I'm not seeing a huge clump of worms in this, so maybe I was mistaken. Oh, there's a few. Maybe they're not a ton to start off a new system, but either way, we're already into it, so what we do get today, we'll go and start it on. I do even have some baby worms like this one. He's a youngin'. Even smaller worms on ones like this, but this whole piece, I'm not going to get them off. I'm always worried about when they're that tiny, possibly hurting them or damaging them. I don't want that. Might as well let them stay on that piece of cardboard, and in a week or so when I come back in here to do another take at this, then they can get out of this material. They'll be a little bit bigger at the time. This isn't a process you have to rush. It's a process to get right. Because if you want productive worms, you need happy worms. There's more of those mites on this little piece of paper, or cardboard. And they've been enjoying all the fresh material that's over in this area, apparently. Not sure where they came from, but just about anyone who does some vermicomposting will deal with mites at some point. They just show up. I don't really add anything from outside into my bins. So I don't know where they come from originally. But it doesn't take many to get a mite infestation started. And once you have them, you pretty much have them. I'm going to be trying to reduce their numbers with that neem cake, but I don't think there will be any completely getting rid of them. Clumps like that, I'm putting a bunch of it in, and then I will, oh, there's a worm clump. Then I'll light sort them out a little bit. Alright, so here, just try to shake them off the big material. Big material will go back into the bucket here, and smaller material like coffee grounds will either get light sorted out, or I will let it go into their new habitat. So when you're setting up a new habitat, it doesn't hurt to have a little bit of the material that they were already comfortable in. It sort of makes the worm transplant process a little less stressful on them if they can slowly branch out into their new environment, but initially have, look at that, initially have a good area. That's a nice worm ball. Oh, beautiful. So we're getting a good amount of worms so far. It's a pretty fun process, and for them to just have done it themselves, I didn't have to sift them and cause them stress. I mean, okay, some of it's going to cause them stress no matter, just going through this, but I didn't have to make them sit through sunlight. I didn't have to make them get sifted completely. Things like that could possibly injure them. There's a reason they don't like sunlight. It's uncomfortable for them. There's you know, they could get injured during a sifting process. They're pretty delicate little critters. Sometimes they can be hardy, but sometimes, you know, you got to remember they're made up of nothing but little tubes of worm meat. They don't have skeletons to speak of to give them better structure. They don't have any sort of plating on the outside to give them structure. They are very delicate little things. And it'd just be too easy for them to get hurt. And that's not what we're about. I don't think anyone who does vermicomposting wants to see their worms hurt. You know, you enjoy coming down and feeding them, taking care of them. It's not like they're pets quite, but they are living critters that are doing a very important task and are very fun to take care of. So I think it's important that we, in turn, take care of them. Okay, so I think I've got about all that I'm going to get for today out of there. So what I'm going to do is re-scoop out this area. I'm going to put material that we pulled out of there into a couple layers. So I'm going to put some at the bottom, just like this. This is the unfinished stuff from the feeding area. And I'm going to add some more material in. I'm going to add something I haven't tried before, is mushrooms. And these are homegrown gray dove oyster mushrooms that went a little bit too long, got their edges a little bit over curled. First time doing mushrooms, and it's part of an experiment. Got a stale tortilla. Just try to give them good things that are nice and tempting over here. Looks like there's a top of a bell pepper, some broccoli stems, a couple of tissues, strawberry, a grape, and yeah, things like tissues might sound gross if they're used, but hey, it's just another way to recycle something, you know? It's why waste when the worms will eat? Let's see, I'm going to get a little fresh lettuce over here, which not only do they love, but also will add some good moisture into this area. Do a new fresh slice of cantaloupe. Nice and juicy. I love some of that. I'll add this in here. Maybe one more slice of that. This area is a little dry. There we go. Just got an old overripe cantaloupe down here, and I'll just hack off a chunk of it when I need it. Alright, I'll put a little more of this back in. I don't think they need more bedding at this point. I've been pulling out a pretty good bit of bedding in chunks out of the finished material here and adding it in. I think we still have a good bit of cardboard down there. Just making sure I get all my worms out of my dirty little worm bucket here. I'll add in some grit. Make sure that they are well taken care of in this area. And that's about it on this one. So I'll just pull the material back up to it. Any chunks that I see, I will toss on top. And then I'll set this system back to doing its thing. And all I'm doing is every few days coming in, giving it a little stir up of the finished material so that it dries that out more. I think I mentioned that already, but hey, sometimes I ramble when I'm talking to the camera. And as that dries out, it'll scoot them over, and I think that was working pretty decently. Now I can come over here even into this bucket, take a little bit more of this material out of here. Big chunks. But like I said, they can take a little bit with them, and that's okay. Beautiful. Alright, then this will be used to start up a new bin, which I will do in a minute. Let me set this aside, get the new bin, and I'll be back. Alright, now before I actually just chuck the worms in here, I'll give you a little tour around my new bin setup. It's pretty light, because it doesn't have any heavy worm castings or heavy worms in it yet. So it's set up with paper on top that's going to help contain some of that moisture, absorb it in, and give them bedding over time. I've got lettuce, cantaloupe, I've got corn husks, egg cartons. Love these as bedding material. You can see they're covered in egg grit, as well as a lot of, not a lot, but a few cups of coffee grounds for the entire system. Over here, I even have an entire ear of corn, hence the corn husks. It's real cheap this time of year, and it will provide a long-term food source that they will eventually fully break down. They will eat the corn all the way off and then start on the cob, and over time I might eventually start breaking that cob into smaller pieces, because more surface area means faster decomposition for the worms. But that's most of the bin, and so these worms, they're going to land right here in the middle, and it's going to be a nice area full of lots of good materials for them, lots of combined fresh stuff, bedding, and the material that they're coming in. Just weighed, and this, including the container, is a pound with all the worms and all their material. I'll weigh the container afterwards so I can sort of get a little bit of a guesstimate of how much I'm putting into here. So I like to try to track and try to predict how much worm is in each system, and see how far off I am with my predictions and my estimates for each spin. That's just kind of a cool way to track things. Alright. Oh, look at that massive worm. That is a very solid worm ball right there. Beautiful. And this isn't sped up at all, that's just how quickly they're moving. As they don't like any light. Even though I don't have real bright lights on overhead, they are just not at all fond of lights. So they will scurry their way away down into the material, which is why it's good to give them something that's already somewhat broken down, that they're somewhat comfortable with already, and get them out of that little panic that they're in. But they will quickly dive down into that, enjoy their new home. Their new home is now Bin Kilo, officially launched. Gotta love it. So not quite a pound of worms. I'll go with, I want to say about 2/3 of a pound of actual worm. Although, how much is the bucket? Yeah, the bucket is a negligible weight. It's only an ounce or so. There's not that much casting material. So overall, about 2/3 of a pound of worms, which should be between 600 and 700 worms. That's a good start, and this bin will continue getting the worms launched from the bin that we were just looking at. So I'll have to keep looking in on these, see how they settle in. I will cover them up with a little bit of that bedding. I'll get a plastic bag over the top that's going to help to regulate that moisture through the whole bin, and I'm excited. This one's ready to roll. Alright, thanks for watching my video, everyone. Have a good day.